Hi everybody, I'm Jonathan Fields and this is Good Life Project. So my guest today is Josh Kaufman, and this is a special episode. One of the things that we've discovered through a lot of our viewers is that the process of trying to live a good life, a better life, often requires you learning a new set of skills. We've had a ton of questions over the last year from people who say, I would love to do this, but I don't have time in my life to do it. I don't want to wait forever to make it happen. So we're bringing you Josh, who's also the author of a book called The First 20 Hours, who's an expert in, I guess, what I would call accelerated learning. So great to be hanging out with you today.
Thanks for having me. Great to hang out.
Couldn't sort of like have asked for a better person to drop in at a better time, because it really is. It's an interesting thing. It seems like the world is moving faster. Mm-hmm. We all want to get stuff done. A lot of people want to make big changes and feel like they're living better lives, but they look out there and they're like, there's stuff that I need to know, stuff that I need to learn, stuff that I need to master to do it. And I just don't have time in the day to do it.
Right.
So I'm curious. I mean, I want to get like right in with you, sort of like the idea behind your book.
Sure.
But one quick question first, which is, what was the motivation for you to actually go down this rabbit hole?
Yeah. So two primary motivations. The first is, in terms of the research and the writing that I do, I like to look at topics that are like fundamental human experiences, like things that everybody needs to know or everybody deals with in some way, shape, or form. And those things can be big and complex and scary and frustrating in a lot of ways. But if you just dive in and break it down, what you often find is it's not really as hard as it feels. Mm-hmm. And so part of the motivation was, learning is something, learning new skills is a fundamental part of what it is to be human. Right. And so let's figure out how to do that. Let's figure out how to do it better.
And most people, for most people, for me, the thought of learning new stuff, I'm giddy. I love it. But for a lot of people,
it's terrifying. Right. Particularly if it's something would be super fun or super valuable, but you know nothing about it, and you just look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is really big. The motivation for me personally was, I run my own business. My wife Kelsey runs her own business. And 2.5 years ago, our daughter Leela came into the world, and all of a sudden we had zero free time. And so, I, just like you, I really geek out about this stuff. I have a list of things that I want to learn a mile long. And so, not having any time, it's like, okay, I may only be able to set aside, half an hour, 45 minutes a day. Yeah. So if that's all I have, then let's figure out how to learn as quickly as possible in that short period.
And at the same time, you don't want to wait forever to get results. I mean, that's a lot of people are like, okay, I could figure out, I could scrap somehow to find that half an hour a day. But does doing it so little mean that it's going to take me 10 years to actually be decent enough at it so it'll actually be fun?
Right. And what I found through my research is that's totally not the case. It doesn't take very long. Yeah. Even if you know absolutely nothing, or you only have a certain amount of time every day to sit down and learn it, you can become very, very good at something in a very short period of time. I think that's fun. So, but this flies in the face to a certain extent also in what has commonly become known as the 10,000 hour rule. Sure, a little bit. It's actually a lot more complimentary than it seem at the surface. So the whole idea of the 10,000 hour rule came from research by K. Anders Ericsson, Florida State University. And the idea behind that was, if you look at the people in ultra-competitive, easily ranked fields, professional golfers, musicians, all of these folks where you can get an estimate of who really is the best in the world on an objective level.
Right.
The question that Dr. Ericsson was researching is, what does it take to get to that level on some very narrow thing? Yeah. So if you want to step on a golf course and compete with Tiger Woods, that's about the amount of time it's going to take you to get there. But the vast majority of us, that's not the goal. That's not what we're trying to do. We just may have something in our minds that we want to accomplish, or an area of life we want to explore. And it takes a lot less time to get what we want out of something.
And I guess for a lot of people, the motivation is probably one of two things. You want to get good enough so you enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Or maybe professionally, you want to develop a skill set enough so that you can actually start to leverage it to either build your career or change your career for a lot of people.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of things that you can learn that can help you do better in your business. There are a bunch of things that you can do to do for fun. It doesn't take that long.
Yeah, so let's dive right into it, because you kind of have a methodology that you developed. So take us through I guess it's 5 sort of core ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so the first step in this process, and this is something that applies to every skill. Could be a motor skill like learning how to fly an airplane or skateboard or something like that. Could be a cognitive skill like language or programming or something. So the first step is deciding exactly what it is you want. Right? Why are you jazzed about this thing in the first place? If you're able to really clearly define what it is you're trying to get, it's called setting a target performance level. The more clearly that level of performance, or the more clearly you can define that, the easier it is for you to look out into the world and find ways to get there in the most direct way possible. Right?
So like, what's an example of that?
So for example, for me, I learned a lot of things in the process of putting together this book. And one of the things that I wanted to be able to do was program. And so instead of just saying, I want to be a programmer, right? Doesn't give you any information whatsoever. So amorphous. It's here is this idea of a program that I would like to sit down and create from nothing. And it looks like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. When I make this thing, I'll have developed the skills that are necessary in order to get the particular result, right?
Got it.
So instead of learning everything in the world about programming, I decided this is the subsegment of that skill I'm interested in learning first, so that's what I'm going to focus on first.
So it has to be like very goal-oriented and also very specific.
Yes. So what is it going to look like when you're done? What are you going to be able to see or experience that'll let you know you reached the level that
Okay, so like if you want to learn a language, is I want to speak French enough, or is it
not enough?
So like, what would that look like in your sort of like framework?
So let's say, for example, I want to go to a restaurant that has a French-speaking waiter, and I want to order and conduct the entire meal in this language and have a good time doing it. That's something that's specific enough to practice.
Got it. Okay.
So you almost make it too specific at the beginning, because once you get to that level, you can always ratchet up the stakes, right? You reach that threshold, practice something else.
I mean, what I found is once you get just like the most baseline proficiency in something, it sucks less.
Yes.
And now you actually, like that baseline level, it creates a whole new level of motivation to want to learn more, because now you've kind of gotten through like the scales in music or something like that.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that the first couple hours of practicing something new are frustrating.
Yeah.
For everyone. Everybody's terrible at the beginning. And so, if you can push through those early few hours, the practice itself becomes fun, and it becomes way easier to continue to improve.
So, okay, so that's number one.
Yes.
Number two.
Okay, so after you decide what you want, you do what's called deconstructing the skill. And the idea behind that is a lot of the things that we think of as skills, like for example, playing golf or speaking French or learning how to program, those aren't exactly skills. They're really kind of general topics that contain lots of smaller sub-skills.
Right.
So it's really hard to practice being a good golfer. It's way easier to practice hitting off of the tee with a driver, right? So you take the global skill and you break it up into much smaller parts. And if you're clear about what you want, it becomes very easy to find what are those sub-skills, what are the smaller parts that are actually going to help you get to that target performance level as quickly as possible.
So like if there are 100 sub-skills, if you've done number one, it makes it much easier to figure out, okay, what are the 15 of those sub-skills that are going to give me 80% of the results towards getting where I want to go.
And what you often find is it's only maybe 2 or 3 sub-skills that you use most of the time.
Huh.
Yeah. So it's just, breaking it down into small enough chunks. If you do just a little bit of research, which is actually step 3, right? You go out into the world and you find sources of information that help you do this deconstruction. If you look at, say for example, pick up 5 books on whatever it is that you're trying to learn how to do. And don't read them cover to cover, skim all of them, one right after the other.
Right.
And what you'll see is the 2 or 3 sub-skills that you're going to use most of the time are the ones that come up over and over again, right? So you just practice those first. And if you spend your time practicing those things and avoid a lot of the distractions or things that aren't going to help you, you save a lot of time and energy as you're practicing.
So I have a big question, so I'll ask you now. If out of a whole basket of potential sub-skills that add up to this thing that you want to accomplish, only a small handful are very often really, really critical, why are we taught to do them all at once?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, actually. I think the biggest thing is we treat in our culture now learning as a very academic exercise. Like the objective is to suck in a ton of information about this thing, whether or not you're going to use it. And I think, education in our culture now has been seen in the academic sense and less in the sense of practicing something with the eye of using it to do some particular cool thing.
So it's less applied.
Yeah.
It's more
So,
theory.
the whole idea of researching the topic, and something that I had to train myself out of, is I love doing research, right? So the first thing, the programming was a good example of this for me. It's like, I want to learn how to program. I get 10 books and I have these courses, and I'm gonna go through all of this stuff, and then I'm going to sit down and write a program. It's like, no. You use the research, do just enough research to help you do the deconstruction and find the most important sub-skills first, and then get out of research mode and into practice mode as quickly as you can.
Because that's where the real stuff's going to happen.
Yeah. And when you start practicing what it is you're actually trying to do, that's when you see the performance improvement.
Now, you also made a differentiation when we started the conversation between cognitive skills, like learning a language, and did you use motor skills?
Yeah.
Motor skills, like swinging a bat or playing golf. Do all of these steps, I mean, we still have 2 more to work through, but with the 3 that we covered so far, are they all sort of equally relevant to both types of learning?
Yeah, so for both types of learning, you have to go through the same general process. Some of the actual practice techniques can be different. So for example, one of the things that you can do when you're practicing a motor skill, which works really well, is practice it within a couple hours of going to sleep. Either taking a nap or going to bed for the night. There's a lot of research around the idea of what's called consolidation. So your brain translates the practice and experience you had and encodes neural connections to help you do it better.
Right.
That practice or that process is way more efficient if you practice within about 4 hours of going to sleep. So in the process of writing the first 20 hours, I retaught myself how to touch type on a different keyboard, which was like, having the experience of rewiring my brain to do something differently.
Right.
And then fun things like playing the ukulele, which is all motor skills. And it was surreal experience. I would practice it right before I would go to bed. And the first couple hours of practice was just terrible.
Right.
So I would practice, I'd go to bed, I'd pick it up first thing in the morning just to see. And it was like astounding how much better I was after a couple hours sleep.
That's amazing.
Because sleep helps consolidate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's really cool.
So yeah, some of the actual practice techniques are different, but the general process is the same.
Right. So that's pretty remarkable. You literally wake up in the morning and you're better than you were when you went to sleep just because you slept in the middle of it.
Absolutely. So yeah, so for
like noticeably better, like really?
Noticeably better. Like one of in the process of learning typing, like once I switched keyboard formats, I went from typing about as fast as I could think to literally like 5 words per minute, like terrible.
Right.
And so practicing right before bed and getting up in the morning and trying to use my computer, like in the first couple of days I was doing it, was like, oh my gosh, I can actually like type now. I can do something.
That's crazy.
And, so that type of thing works for a motor skill. For cognitive skills, memorization techniques like spaced repetition reinforcement, like flashcard model or flashcards with feedback helping you remember things works really well. So yeah, the actual practice techniques can be very different, but the core method of learning is very much the same.
And again, for both of them, before you go to bed,
yes,
helps with the consolidation.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. What about simulated practice?
Simulated practice can be effective as long as it is as close to real world performance as you can make it.
Right.
So a lot of the trying to memorize something and then having that translate directly into practice doesn't really work.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more in terms of like motor skills.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was a gymnast when I was a kid, we would before any event, I would basically, before I would step up to a piece of apparatus, I would kind of close my eyes and I would actually envision my body like moving through the entire thing.
Okay.
And then there was all this research that said that it triggers all the same motor neurons that would be trigger like the same response in your brain.
Yes.
As if you were actually doing it. But I'm curious in terms of sort of like, accelerated learning, whether that would actually make you progress faster and towards a high level of proficiency in that skill.
There is quite a bit of research that says that imaginary types of practice does work, and it works well, with a catch, which is you have to do it in addition to the physical practice, right? So if you're starting to consolidate those motor movements and you're doing that in practice, and then you're reinforcing that with imagined practice, awesome.
Got it.
But what I found is a lot of people get caught up in the process of just doing the physical practice first.
So we got to 3 of the 5 steps now. So let's kind of like close the loop here. So step number 4.
Okay, step number 4 is removing barriers to practice. So things that are preventing you from actually sitting down and doing the work.
Okay.
Sometimes those things are environmental distractions, like turning off the TV or blocking the internet or closing the door. All of the things that you can do to make sure in those early hours of practice, which are frustrating, you don't get so frustrated that it's easy to stop focusing on whatever it is that you're doing and start paying attention to something else. Likewise, anything that you can do to make sure it takes as little energy as possible to start practicing is super helpful at that point. So, instead of keeping your guitar in the case in the back of the closet on the other side of your house, right? Take the guitar out of the case, get a stand, put it right next to your couch, and that just anything that you can do to make it easier on yourself to get those early hours of practice, the better.
Yeah, I mean, my guitar is actually hanging out on a rack because of that. It's like almost because I just forget it's even there.
Totally.
It's like the visual cue actually makes a really big difference for me. All right, so number 4 is now. I'm curious also. I mean, it sounds like there's a bit of crossover between that and sort of like B.J. Fogg's work on really
tiny habits.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's a lot of the same. This is where the behavioral psychology elements of this come in.
Right.
It's how can you make it easier to do the thing that you want to be doing instead of getting distracted by some shiny object and going and doing something else. So instead of relying on exerting a lot of willpower to force yourself to do this thing that you've decided you want to do, you spend a little bit of willpower, a little bit of time and energy altering the structure of the environment around you.
Right.
And just make it easy as possible to do the thing that you want to do.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, last item, number 5.
Last one. Pre-commit to practicing at least 20 hours. And this is the big one. So all the things that we've talked about so far is getting set up to sit down and do the work of actually practicing. The pre-commitment and the idea of practicing at least 20 hours, there's a lot of behavioral psychology behind that. The 2 big things is, first, it's a really important check on your reasons for learning this thing in the first place.
So it's kind of like, if I'm not willing to commit to 20 hours, I can't be all that serious about it.
Yeah, it's like, is it worthwhile for me to rearrange my schedule and stop doing other things? And is this something that I'm expecting to get enough benefit from to make the effort worth it?
Yeah.
If it's not, don't do it.
Right.
Life is short. It's like, go do something else that you will get more benefit out of or you are more excited about. So if you're willing to set aside at least 20 hours, what the pre-commitment does is make sure that you practice long enough to push through that early frustration and actually start seeing results. And I think a lot of us really seriously overestimate just how long it takes to become good at something. So you can become really, really good at something, surprisingly good at something, in as little as 20 hours. So if you practice that long, you're going to be way better at the end of that than you were at the beginning.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people also figure, well, 20 hours, I've done that with a million different things, and I really wasn't very good. But probably when they actually look back and say, well, no, like I missed 3 days here, and like that one day where I was, said I was practicing for an hour, I was really only practicing for 10 minutes. So when you really add up all the time, I'm guessing there's a little bit of self-delusion that happens.
There's actually quite a bit of research behind this. Our minds are not built to accurately estimate time. And in the early parts of learning something new, it's like, it's terrible. It's like, oh man, I've been at this hours. And you look at the clock and you've been at it 10 minutes.
Right.
And so a lot of the, both pre-committing to a certain amount of practicing. So 20 hours roughly is about 40 minutes a day for a month, give or take.
So you can kind of think in your mind 40 minutes a day for a month.
So a couple of, and I usually break my practice sessions into about 20 minutes apiece, right? So 2 20-minute practice sessions, every day for about a month can get you there. And so, you know, if you're able and willing to do that, pre-committing the time, make sure that you practice long enough to see that really good result. But it's also, you know, psychologically it doesn't feel like that big of a hurdle to say, okay, this is important to me.
Right.
I can set aside at least that amount of time, right? So it's just enough that you're going to see dramatic results, but not so much that it prevents you from making the pre-commitment in the first place.
I love that. So let's recap the 5 steps.
Okay. So the 5 steps in order. Step 1, decide what you want. What's your target performance level? Step 2 is deconstruct the skill. Separate it into smaller sub-skills, practice the most important ones first. Number 3 is research the skill just enough to do the deconstruction and choose the most important sub-skills, but not so much that it becomes a barrier to practice in itself. Number 4 is eliminate barriers to practice. Make it easy to do what you want to do. And number 5 is pre-commit to practicing whatever it is that you want to be able to do for at least 20 hours.
Love it. All right. So my mind is spinning because I'm thinking to myself, okay, what am I going to do?
I was gonna ask, what's in the back of your mind? What have you always wanted to learn how to do?
It's interesting. I mean, languages, because I don't speak another language. I took Latin for 6 years, which means I speak nothing but English. It's interesting. Like, I want to blurt out a whole bunch of different things, but number 5 is making me say, I need to really think about this.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to like say, okay, people, I'm going to commit to this publicly.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, an hour after we film this, I'm like, I'm not really like willing to put in my 20 hours for that. So it's interesting. I'm really thinking that through. Awesome conversation. And I love sort of like the breakdown that you have. And this is all, I mean, obviously detailed and, you know, a whole bunch more extensively in the first 20 hours. But thanks for stopping by and sharing this with me, because like I said, one of the consistent questions that we keep getting from people is, you know, I know that for me to get to a place where I feel like, you know, like I'm living well in the world, I'm doing these things, career, personal, whatever it is, there's a body of knowledge that I need to know and get decent at. But I don't know how to do it, and I think it's going to take forever. So I think this is a really great formula to help people get there.
Thanks. And, you know, I think the really good news is that the outcome of this research is the barrier to sitting down and learning something new is not intellectual. We're all smart enough to sit down and figure it out and practice in a smart way. The barrier is emotional. And so, you know, a lot of these things are just working with ourselves in a smart way to decide we're interested in doing something, figure out how to do it, and actually sit down and practice so we can do a bunch of cool stuff.
Love it.
That's fun.
Awesome.
All right.
Fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My guest today has been Josh Kaufman, the author of First 20 Hours. I'm Jonathan Fields, signing off for Good Life Project.